My sister Michelle was dead. At least, that's what I believed for 2 years. Until the day I walked into my husband's warehouse unannounced and heard her singing the same lullaby our mother used to sing. When our eyes met through the bars of a hidden room, she didn't cry for help. She cried for forgiveness. And what she confessed next destroyed everything I thought I knew. Thank you for being here. Before we continue, hit like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Quick note, this is a fictional story with dramatized elements for storytelling and educational value. Any resemblance to real events is coincidental, but the message is deeply meaningful. Now, let me tell you what happened next. The October rain hadn't stopped for 3 days straight. That was Portland. For you, gray skies, wet pavement, and the kind of cold that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I didn't mind it usually, but that afternoon, as I drove toward James's warehouse on the outskirts of the city, something felt different. The rain seemed heavier, the sky seemed darker, and the knot in my stomach seemed tighter than it had any right to be. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was just bringing my husband lunch. A surprise. Something sweet. James had been working late every night for the past 3 weeks, and I missed him. We'd been married for 6 years. And somewhere along the way, the distance between us had grown wider than I wanted to admit. I thought maybe a small gesture, his favorite sandwich from that deli he loved, a thermos of hot coffee might remind us both of what we used to have. The warehouse sat at the end of an industrial road, surrounded by other storage facilities and empty lots. Whitmore Logistics. The sign read in faded blue letters. James had built this business from nothing, or so he always told me. Import and export, shipping containers. Nothing glamorous, but profitable enough to afford our house in West Hills and the life we lived. I parked next to his black Mercedes and grabbed the paper bag from the passenger seat. The rain pelted my umbrella as I walked toward the main entrance, my heels clicking against the wet concrete. The building was massive, a steel and concrete giant that always made me feel small whenever I visited, which wasn't often. James preferred to keep his work and home life separate. He said it helped him focus. The front office was empty when I stepped inside. No receptionist at the desk, no sound of voices or ringing phones, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of thunder outside. James, I called out, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer. I checked my phone. No messages. He'd told me this morning he'd be here all day, catching up on inventory reports. Maybe he was in the back, in the actual warehouse section, where the shipping containers were stored. I pushed through the door that led to the main floor. The space opened up before me, rows upon rows of metal containers stacked 2 or 3 high. Forklifts parked in neat lines, pallets wrapped in plastic waiting to be moved. The air smelled like diesel and cardboard and something faintly metallic. James? I called again. Still, nothing. I walked deeper into the warehouse, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows between the containers. I told myself there was nothing eerie about it. This was just a warehouse, just my husband's workplace, just a building full of ordinary things. And then I heard it, faint at first. So faint, I thought I was imagining it. A melody drifting through the air, somewhere between the stacked containers to my left. I stopped walking and held my breath, straining to listen. Singing. Someone was singing. My heart stuttered in my chest. The melody was familiar, achingly, impossibly familiar. A lullaby. The same lullaby my mother used to sing to Michelle and me when we were children, before cancer took her 8 years ago. The same lullaby I hadn't heard since the day we buried my sister 2 years ago. Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. The paper bag slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. I didn't notice. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because that voice singing my mother's lullaby in my husband's warehouse sounded exactly like Michelle. But Michelle was dead. She had taken her own life 2 years ago. I had identified her body, I had buried her. I had mourned her every single day since. So why was I hearing her voice now? My feet moved before my mind could catch up. I followed the sound, weaving between shipping containers, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The singing grew louder with each step, clearer, more real. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't a ghost. Someone was here, in this warehouse, singing the lullaby that had died with my mother. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. I turned a corner and found myself facing a wall of containers stacked 3 high. A dead end. But the voice was coming from somewhere close. So close I could almost reach out and touch it. I pressed my hand against the cold metal of the nearest container, steadying myself. Think, Rachel, think. The sound seemed to be coming from below me, which made no sense. This was a warehouse floor, concrete and steel. There was nothing below. And then I noticed it. A seam in the floor that didn't quite match the rest. A rectangular outline, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge, and felt a slight gap. A door. A hidden door built into the warehouse floor. My hands trembled as I searched for a way to open it. I found a small latch disguised as a drainage grate, and pulled. The door lifted with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The singing stopped. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring into the black void below. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call the police, to get out of this building and never come back. But somewhere down there, someone was singing my mother's lullaby. Someone who sounded exactly like my dead sister. I had to know. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, then started down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, damper, like descending into a basement that had never seen sunlight. The walls were concrete, rough and unpainted. At the bottom, maybe 15 steps down, I found myself in a narrow corridor that stretched about 20 feet before ending at a steel door. A steel door with a small window. And behind that window, a soft glow of light. I approached slowly, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Through the window, I could see a room. Small, maybe 10 feet by 12. Concrete walls covered in some kind of foam padding. A single bed with a thin mattress. A toilet and sink in one corner. A small table with books and a half-eaten meal. And sitting on the bed, her back to the door, was a woman with dark hair that fell past her shoulders. She was thin, too thin. Her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. She wasn't singing anymore. She was crying. I don't remember making a sound. But somehow, she heard me. She turned around slowly, and when her eyes met mine through the small window, the world stopped spinning. Michelle, my sister. My dead sister. Alive. Trapped in a room beneath my husband's warehouse. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath paper-thin skin, dark circles carved hollows under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in years, but it was her. Those same brown eyes that had looked at me across the breakfast table every morning of my childhood. That same mole above her left eyebrow. That same face I had mourned for 2 years. Rachel? Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. She stood up from the bed, her legs unsteady, and moved toward the door, her hand pressed against the glass from the inside. Rachel, is that really you? I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My brain was trying to process something that defied everything I knew to be true. Michelle was dead. I had seen her body. I had watched them lower her coffin into the ground. I had thrown a handful of dirt onto the polished wood and felt a piece of my soul go with it. But she was here, alive, staring at me through a window in a door that locked from the outside. How? The word came out, strangled, broken. How is this possible? Michelle's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her hollow cheeks, and she shook her head slowly, as if she couldn't believe I was real either. He put me here, she whispered. James, your husband. He's kept me here for 2 years. The corridor tilted. I reached out to steady myself against the wall, my vision swimming. James. My James. The man I slept next to every night. The man who held me when I cried about losing my sister. The man who had stood beside me at Michelle's funeral and squeezed my hand and told me everything would be okay. I don't understand, I heard myself say. I saw your body. The police said you jumped from the bridge. They found your car, your note, everything. Michelle pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the small window. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. He staged it all, Rachel. The suicide note, the abandoned car, everything. She looked up at me, and in her eyes, I saw something that shattered what was left of my heart. Guilt. Overwhelming, devastating guilt. But that's not the worst part. She took a shaky breath. I'm so sorry, Rachel, for everything. There's something I need to tell you. Something about James. About what we did. Her voice broke completely. About what we did to Dad. The world went silent. The only sound was my own heartbeat, thundering in my ears like a war drum. What do you mean? I whispered. What we did to Dad. Michelle didn't answer my question. Instead, she pressed both palms against the glass and stared at me with those hollow eyes, tears still streaming down her face. Please, she whispered. Please get me out of here first. I'll tell you everything, I promise. But I need to get out of this room. I've been in here for 2 years, Rachel. 2 years. Her voice cracked on the last words, and something inside me cracked with it. Whatever questions I had, whatever impossible truths were waiting to be revealed, they could wait. My sister was alive. My sister was trapped. And right now, nothing else mattered. I examined the door, heavy steel, industrial grade, with a deadbolt that required a key. But beside the deadbolt was an electronic keypad, its screen glowing faint green in the dim corridor. Do you know the code? I asked. Michelle shook her head. He changes it every week. But Rachel, there's a manual override. A red lever on the wall to your left. James showed it to me once, when he first brought me here. He said it was in case of emergencies. Her laugh was bitter. Broken. I don't think he ever imagined you would be the emergency. I found the lever, half hidden behind a bundle of cables. My hand closed around it, cold metal against my palm. One pull, and everything would change. One pull, and I would have to face whatever truth my sister had been holding for 2 years. I pulled. The door clicked open with a mechanical hiss. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other through the widening gap. 2 sisters, separated by secrets and lies, and a doorframe that had become a prison. Then Michelle stumbled forward, and I caught her in my arms. She weighed nothing. Absolutely nothing. I could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her shirt, who could feel how fragile she had become, how broken. She clung to me like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft, her fingers digging into my shoulders, her whole body shaking with sobs. I'm sorry, she kept saying, over and over. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I'm so sorry. I held her tighter, my own tears falling into her tangled hair. It's okay, I whispered, even though nothing was okay, even though I didn't understand anything, even though my husband had apparently kept my sister locked in a basement for 2 years while I slept beside him every night. It's okay. I've got you. We stayed like that for a long time. Minutes, maybe, or maybe just seconds, that felt like hours. Eventually, Michelle's sobs quieted, and she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her face was a mess of tears and snot and 2 years of suffering. But underneath it all, she was still my sister. Still the girl who had taught me how to ride a bike. Still the woman who had held my hand at our mother's funeral. We need to get out of here, I said. Before James comes back. Michelle nodded, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear. Yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like shame. Rachel, before we go, I need to tell you something. She gripped my hands, her fingers ice cold. About why I'm here. About why James did this. You can tell me later. Right now, we need to. No. Her voice was suddenly sharp, urgent. You need to understand. I wasn't just a random victim. James didn't lock me up because I found out some business secret or stumbled onto something I shouldn't have seen. She swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. He locked me up because I was going to tell you the truth. About us. About what we were planning to do. The corridor seemed to grow colder. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air between us. What are you talking about? Michelle closed her eyes, as if the words she was about to say were too heavy to speak while looking at me. James and I were having an affair, Rachel. It started before you even met him. I introduced you to him. Remember? At that charity gala 8 years ago? She opened her eyes, and I saw the full weight of her guilt reflected in them. But what you didn't know was that I had been seeing him for 6 months before that night. He was mine first, and when he started showing interest in you, I thought I would lose him. My hands went numb. I pulled them away from hers without even realizing I was doing it. But I didn't lose him. Michelle continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Not really. He kept seeing me. Even after you started dating. Even after you got engaged. Even after you got married. For 6 years. Rachel, 6 years of sneaking around behind your back. 6 years of lying to your face. I took a step backward. Then another. My back hit the cold concrete wall of the corridor, but I barely felt it. Why are you telling me this? My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded distant, hollow, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. Michelle's face crumpled again. Because you need to understand what kind of man James really is, and what kind of person I was. She reached for me, but I flinched away. Pain flashed across her face. But she didn't stop talking. The affair wasn't the worst part, Rachel. The worst part is what James convinced me to do. What he made me believe was the only way we could be together. She took a shaky breath. 3 years ago, James came to me with a plan. He said we could finally be together, for real, if we just got you out of the way. He said you were the only thing standing between us and happiness. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. And I believed him. Got me out of the way? I repeated. The words tasted like poison. What does that mean? Michelle looked at me with eyes full of tears and 20 years of sisterhood and something that looked like the beginning of a confession that would tear my world apart. It means we were going to kill you, Rachel, James and I. We had it all planned out. Her voice broke completely. But first, we needed to practice. We needed to make sure we could do it without getting caught. The world tilted. That's why we started with Dad. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Started with Dad. My father. David. Chen. The man who had built Chen Construction from nothing. Who had raised 2 daughters on his own after our mother died. Who had collapsed in his office 3 years ago from what the doctors called sudden cardiac arrest. No. The word came out of me like a reflex. Like my body was rejecting what my ears had just heard. No, that's not possible. Dad had a heart condition, the doctors said. The doctors said what James wanted them to say. Michelle's voice was flat now, drained of emotion, as if confessing had emptied her of everything she had left. Dad didn't have a heart condition, Rachel. Not until we gave him one. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold concrete floor. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. Nothing could hold me anymore. Arsenic, Michelle continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. Small doses. Over 6 months. James researched it for weeks. He said, arsenic poisoning mimics heart disease if you do it slowly enough. The fatigue, the shortness of breath, the irregular heartbeat. By the time Dad went to the doctor, his heart was already failing. They never thought to test for poison. Why would they? He was 62 years old with a stressful job. Heart attacks happen. I pressed my hands against my eyes, trying to block out the world, trying to wake up from this nightmare. But when I opened them again, Michelle was still there. Still looking at me with those haunted eyes. still telling me things that couldn't possibly be true. Why? The word came out as a sob. Why would you do that to Dad? He loved you. He loved both of us. Michelle flinched as if I had slapped her. She wrapped her arms around herself, her thin frame shaking. I know he did. I know. Her voice cracked. But James made me believe that Dad was the problem. He said Dad never approved of him, that Dad was going to convince you to leave him. He said if Dad was gone, we could be together without anyone interfering. And I was so stupid, Rachel. So desperate to hold on to something that was never really mine. She looked at me then, and I saw the full horror of what she had done reflected in her eyes. Not just guilt, not just shame, something deeper, something that had been eating her alive for 3 years. After Dad died, you inherited everything. The company, the properties, the investments. $45 million, all in your name. James said, that was always the real plan. He said, once we got rid of you, we would split everything and disappear. My father's face flashed before my eyes. His smile at my wedding. His proud tears when I took over as CEO of Chen Construction. His voice on the phone 2 days before he died, telling me he was tired but fine, that I shouldn't worry, that he would see me for dinner on Sunday. He never made it to Sunday, but something changed, I heard myself say. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. You're here, locked in this room. Something must have changed. Michelle nodded slowly. I changed. Or at least, I tried to. She sat down on the floor across from me, her back against the steel door of her prison. About 2.5 years ago, James started talking about the next phase. Your phase. He had it all planned out. The same method we used on Dad. Slow poisoning over several months, making it look like a genetic heart condition that ran in your family. He even found a doctor willing to falsify medical records. Someone named Nathan Cross. Dr. Nathan Cross. I filed the name away in my mind, adding it to the growing list of horrors. But when he started explaining the details, I couldn't do it. My baby sister, the person I taught to ride a bike, who held my hand at Mom's funeral, who called me crying when she found out she couldn't have children. She shook her head violently. I couldn't. I told James I wanted out. I said I was going to tell you everything, and that's when he put you here. That night, Michelle's laugh was hollow, empty. I was supposed to meet you for coffee the next morning. Remember? To talk about redecorating your living room. I remembered. I remembered waiting at that coffee shop for an hour. I remembered calling Michelle's phone over and over. I remembered the police showing up at my door 3 days later, telling me they'd found her car abandoned on the Vista Bridge, a suicide note on the dashboard, her body never recovered from the river below. He drugged me after dinner, Michelle said. When I woke up, I was here. He told me this was my punishment for betraying him. He said I would stay in this room until I died, and no one would ever know what happened. He said if I somehow escaped, he would tell the police I helped kill Dad, and I would spend the rest of my life in prison. She looked at me with eyes that had seen 2 years of darkness. He visits once a week, brings food, water, books. He likes to tell me how happy you two are, how you've moved on from losing your sister, how you'll never know the truth. Her voice hardened. He's been poisoning you, Rachel, the same way we poisoned Dad. I don't know how far along you are, but if he's been doing it for more than 6 months, you might already be. A sound from above cut her off. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Somewhere in the warehouse overhead. Michelle's face went white. He's here, she whispered. James is here. We both froze, our eyes locked on the ceiling above us as the footsteps moved across the warehouse floor. Heavy, confident, the walk of a man who owned everything around him and knew it. We have to go. I grabbed Michelle's arm and pulled her to her feet. Now, Rachel. Wait. Michelle stumbled, her legs weak from 2 years of captivity. There's a camera in my room. If he checks the feed, then we need to be gone before he does. I half carried her toward the stairs, my heart slamming against my ribs. Michelle weighed almost nothing, but her legs kept buckling beneath her. Unused muscles failing after so long without proper exercise. Every second felt like an eternity. Every footstep from above sounded closer than the last. We reached the bottom of the stairs. I looked up at the rectangle of gray light at the top, the hidden door I had left open in my shock. The footsteps had stopped. The warehouse had gone silent. Too silent. Is there another way out? I whispered. Michelle shook her head. Not from down here. But there's a back exit in the warehouse. Through the loading dock on the east side. If we can get up there, without him seeing us. A phone rang somewhere above. James's ringtone. The one he used for business calls. I heard his voice, muffled but distinct, answering with that smooth, professional tone I had fallen in love with years ago. Yeah. I'm at the warehouse now. Just checking on a shipment. I'll be home in about an hour. Home. He was planning to come home to me in an hour. To kiss me hello. To ask about my day. To hand me a cup of tea laced with poison. The thought gave me strength I didn't know I had. I tightened my grip on Michelle and started up the stairs, moving as quietly as possible. 1 step, 2, 3. Michelle clung to my shoulder, her breathing ragged but controlled. We reached the top. I peered through the gap in the hidden door, scanning the warehouse floor. Rows of shipping containers stretched out before me, casting long shadows in the fluorescent light. I couldn't see James, but I could hear him. His voice echoed off the metal walls, still on that phone call. Somewhere to our right. We go left. I breathed into Michelle's ear. Stay low. Stay quiet. She nodded, her face pale, but determined. We slipped through the door and into the warehouse. I kept one hand on Michelle's arm, guiding her between the containers, using them as cover. The loading dock was maybe 50 yards away. 50 yards of open space and towering metal boxes and the constant threat of discovery. James's voice grew louder, then softer, then louder again. He was moving, pacing while he talked, the way he always did during business calls. I tried to track his position by sound alone, adjusting our path to stay as far from him as possible. 20 yards to the loading dock. I could see the large roll-up door now, a sliver of gray daylight visible at the bottom where it didn't quite meet the floor. 15 yards. 10. Michelle's foot caught on a pallet. She stumbled, her hand slapping against a metal container with a sound that echoed through the entire warehouse like a gunshot. We both froze. James's voice stopped mid-sentence. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Then footsteps. Fast. Coming our way. Run. I hissed. I didn't wait to see if Michelle could keep up. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the loading dock, abandoning all pretense of stealth. Our footsteps pounded against the concrete floor, echoing off the walls, announcing our presence to anyone who cared to listen. Rachel? James's voice rang out behind us, confused and sharp. Rachel, is that you? I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I just ran. We reached the loading dock. A smaller door was set into the wall beside the main roll-up gate, an emergency exit with a push bar. I slammed into it with my shoulder, and it flew open, spilling us out into the gray October afternoon. The rain hit my face like a blessing. Cold and clean and real. My car, I gasped. This way. We ran around the side of the building, Michelle stumbling every few steps but somehow keeping pace. I could hear the emergency door bang open behind us. James was following. Rachel. Stop! What the hell is going on? I reached my car and yanked open the driver's door. Michelle scrambled into the passenger seat, and I was behind the wheel before she even got her door closed. The engine roared to life. I threw it into reverse, tires squealing against the wet pavement. In my rearview mirror, I saw James emerge from behind the building. He stood in the rain, his expensive suit getting soaked, His face, a mask of confusion, and something else. Something darker. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I didn't wait to see who he was calling. I floored the accelerator and tore out of the parking lot, leaving Whitmore Logistics behind in a spray of rainwater and gravel. Michelle was shaking beside me, her whole body trembling. I kept my eyes on the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my mind racing faster than the car. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. I glanced at the screen, and my blood ran cold. James. Heading home early tonight. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart. We need to talk about something important. He knew. Maybe not everything, but he knew something was wrong, and whatever happened next, I couldn't go home. I drove without thinking, taking random turns, doubling back, doing everything I could to make sure no one was following us. The rain hammered against the windshield, and the wipers beat a frantic rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Beside me, Michelle sat curled in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on the side mirror. Is he behind us? I asked. I don't think so. Her voice was hoarse, strained. But Rachel, the camera. He's going to check the camera feed. He'll know I'm gone. He'll know you took me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. She was right. Even if James hadn't seen us clearly, even if he thought maybe he had imagined hearing my voice in the warehouse, the moment he checked that security footage, he would know everything. He would see me finding the hidden door. He would see me opening Michelle's cell. He would see us running. And then what? What would a man who had already killed once, who had kept his lover locked in a basement for 2 years, who was slowly poisoning his own wife, what would a man like that do when he realized his entire world was about to come crashing down? I can't go home, I said, more to myself than to Michelle. No, you can't. I glanced at her. In the gray light of the rainy afternoon, she looked even worse than she had in that underground room. Her skin had a grayish pallor, her cheeks were sunken, and her hands trembled constantly. 2 years without sunlight. 2 years of minimal food and water. 2 years of psychological torture. From the man who claimed to love her. Where do we go? Michelle asked. I thought about it. The logical thing would be to drive straight to the nearest precinct, walk inside, and tell them everything. My husband kidnapped my sister. My husband killed my father. My husband is trying to kill me. But what proof did I have? Michelle's word against James's? A hidden room that James could claim he knew nothing about? My husband was a successful businessman with connections throughout the city. He had lawyers. He had money. He had the kind of charm that made people believe every word he said. And Michelle had just confessed to helping murder our father. If we go to the police right now, you'll be arrested too, I said slowly. You just told me you helped kill Dad. That's conspiracy to commit murder. I know what it is. Michelle's voice was flat. I've had 2 years to think about what it is. We drove in silence for a few more blocks. The rain was starting to let up, the gray sky brightening slightly toward the west. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I needed somewhere safe where we could figure out our next move. Karen. The name surfaced in my mind like a lifeline. Karen Mitchell had been my best friend since college. She was a nurse at Portland General, practical and level-headed and fiercely loyal. She lived alone in a small apartment in southeast Portland, far enough from our neighborhood that James wouldn't think to look there. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring. Rachel? Hey, what's up? Karen. My voice cracked on her name. I need your help. I need somewhere to go. Something's happened. Something bad. And I can't explain over the phone. But please, can I come to your place? A pause. Then, without hesitation, of course, I'm home right now. Come straight over. Thank you. I ended the call and turned to Michelle. We're going to my friend's apartment. She's someone I trust. Michelle nodded, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. After everything that had happened, After discovering that the two people closest to her had betrayed her in the worst possible ways, I understood why trust didn't come easily anymore. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of Karen's apartment building. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the streets slick and shining. I helped Michelle out of the car, supporting her weight as we made our way to the entrance. She was weaker than I had realized, her legs giving out every few steps. 2 years in that room had broken something in her body that might never fully heal. Karen was waiting at her door. Her eyes went wide when she saw Michelle, then wider still when she recognized who it was. Oh my God! Her hand flew to her mouth. Michelle? But you're… Rachel. What the hell is going on? Can we come inside? I asked. Please. I'll explain everything. Karen stepped aside, and I guided Michelle into the small, warm apartment. Karen's cat, an orange tabby named Mango, jumped off the couch and disappeared into the bedroom, startled by the strangers invading his space. I helped Michelle onto the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She was shivering again. Though the apartment was warm, Karen brought water, crackers, and 1,000 questions in her eyes that she was somehow managing to keep behind her lips. I sat down across from them both and took a deep breath. Michelle is alive, I began, stating the obvious. She's been alive this whole time. James kept her locked in a hidden room beneath his warehouse for 2 years. Karen's face went pale. James? Your husband? James? Yes. The word tasted like ash. And that's not all. There's more. So much more. I looked at Michelle, who met my gaze with those hollow, haunted eyes. Tell her, Michelle whispered. Tell her everything. She needs to understand what kind of monster we're dealing with. Karen looked between us, confusion and fear warring on her face. Rachel, she said slowly. What the hell is going on? I told Karen everything. Not the full details, not yet, but enough. Enough to make her understand why Michelle was sitting on her couch looking like a ghost. Enough to make her understand why I couldn't go home. Enough to make her understand that the man I had married, the man she had toasted at my wedding, the man who had brought flowers to her hospital when she had her appendix removed, was a monster wearing a human face. Karen listened without interrupting. Her nursing training had taught her how to stay calm in crisis situations, how to process information without letting emotion cloud her judgment. But I could see her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her mug of tea. He could see the color draining from her face with each new revelation. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she turned to Michelle. 2 years, she said softly. You were down there for 2 years. Michelle nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. I visited Rachel dozens of times during those 2 years. We had dinner parties, birthday celebrations. I sat across from James at Thanksgiving and complimented his cooking. Karen's voice hardened, and the whole time, you were locked in a basement. I'm sorry, Michelle whispered. It seemed to be the only words she knew how to say anymore. Karen shook her head. Don't apologize to me. I'm not the one who… She stopped herself, took a breath, and turned back to me. Rachel, we need to call the police. This is kidnapping. This is attempted murder. This is way beyond anything we can handle ourselves. I know. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. But it's complicated. Complicated how? I glanced at Michelle, who had gone very still. Because Michelle wasn't just a victim, I said quietly. She was also part of it. At the beginning, Karen's eyebrows shot up. Part of what? The silence stretched between us. Michelle's shoulders hunched forward, her whole body curling in on itself, as if she could make herself small enough to disappear. I waited for her to speak, to explain, but she seemed frozen, so I did it for her. Michelle and James were having an affair. For years, before he even met me, the words burned coming out. He used her to get close to our family, to get close to me and the money I would inherit when my father died. Karen's face went through a series of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, horror. Your father's death, she said slowly. You told me it was a heart attack. That's what we all thought. I couldn't look at Michelle as I said the next part. But it wasn't. James and Michelle poisoned him. Slowly, over 6 months. Arsenic. It mimics heart disease if you do it right. The mug slipped from Karen's fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, tea spreading in a dark stain across the beige fibers. She didn't seem to notice. You helped kill your own father? Her voice was barely a whisper. Directed at Michelle. Michelle finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face streaked with tears that had fallen silently while I spoke. Yes, she said. I did. And I've spent every day since wishing I could take it back. Wishing I had been stronger. Wishing I had seen James for what he really was before it was too late. Karen stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Mango peeked out from the bedroom doorway, sensed the tension, and retreated again. This is insane, Karen muttered. This is absolutely insane. You're telling me your husband is a serial killer? That your sister helped him murder your father? That he's been keeping her locked up for 2 years while slowly poisoning you? Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Karen stopped pacing. She turned to face us both, her expression shifting from shock to something harder, more determined. Okay, she said. Okay, let's think about this logically. You can't go to the police yet because Michelle would be arrested as an accomplice. But you also can't just hide forever. James is going to figure out what happened. He probably already knows. As if on cue. My phone buzzed again. Another text from James. Rachel, where are you? I came home, and you weren't here. Getting worried. Call me. I showed the screen to Karen, who read it with narrowed eyes. He's testing you, she said. Seeing how you respond. If you don't answer soon, he'll know something is wrong. It's already wrong, Michelle said quietly. He saw us at the warehouse. He might not have seen clearly, but he knows someone was there, and the camera footage will show everything. I stared at my phone, at James's message with its fake concern and hidden threat. 3 hours ago, I would have smiled at a text like this. I would have felt loved, cared for. Now all I could see was the mask, the performance, the lies layered upon lies upon lies. I need to buy us time, I said. Time to figure out what to do next. Time to find proof that will hold up against James's lawyers and money and connections. Karen nodded slowly. Then, you need to answer him. Act normal. Make him think nothing is wrong. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Acting normal with the man who murdered my father. Acting normal with the man who was slowly killing me. Acting normal with the man who had turned my sister into a prisoner and a ghost. I typed, "Sorry, honey. Ran into an old friend from college. Lost track of time. Heading home soon." I hit send before I could change my mind. Karen put a hand on my shoulder. "You're not going home. You know that, right?" "I know." I looked at Michelle, at her hollow eyes and trembling hands. "But I need to understand more first. I need to know everything. Every detail of what James did and how." Michelle met my gaze. And for the first time since I found her in that room, I saw something other than guilt and fear in her eyes. I saw determination. "Then I'll tell you," she said. "Everything." Karen brought more tea and a plate of sandwiches that none of us touched. The rain had started again outside, tapping against the windows like restless fingers. Michelle sat wrapped in her blanket, staring at nothing, gathering the strength to tell a story she had kept locked inside for nearly a decade. "It started 8 years ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "James walked in one day for a meeting with my boss about some logistics campaign. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I remembered that version of James, the one who had swept me off my feet, The one who brought me flowers for no reason and remembered every small detail I ever mentioned. I had thought I was special. Turns out, I was just the next target. We started seeing each other that same week, Michelle continued. Drinks after work, dinner, then more. I knew he was dangerous in some way I couldn't explain. There was something behind his eyes, something cold, but I was lonely, and he made me feel wanted. She laughed bitterly. That was always my weakness, needing to feel wanted. Karen shifted on her chair but said nothing. I could see her processing everything, her nursing instincts cataloging symptoms and causes and effects. After about 6 months, James started asking questions about my family. Casual at first. What did my father do for a living? How big was Chen Construction? Did I get along with my little sister? Michelle looked at me then. Her eyes filled with shame. I thought he was interested in my life. I thought he cared. But he was mapping us, studying us, planning. Planning what? Karen asked. Everything. Michelle's voice hardened. One night, about 4 months before he met you, Rachel, James sat me down and told me he had been researching our family. He knew about Chen Construction. He knew about Dad's net worth. He knew that you were the one who would inherit everything, because you were the one who worked in the business, the one Dad was grooming to take over. My stomach churned. I thought back to that charity gala where I had first met James. Michelle had introduced us. She had smiled and said he was an old friend from a business conference. She had watched us exchange numbers and never said a word. James told me he wanted to be with me forever, Michelle continued. But he said we needed money. Real money. The kind of money that would let us disappear and start a new life somewhere beautiful. He said your inheritance could give us that. All we had to do was wait for Dad to die and then remove you from the equation. The words hung in the air like poison gas. At first, I said no. I told him he was crazy, that I would never hurt you. You were my baby sister. I had held you when you were born. I had taught you to ride a bike, helped you with your homework, held your hand at Mom's funeral. Michelle's voice cracked. But James was patient, so patient. He spent months working on me, convincing me that you had always been Dad's favorite, that you had gotten everything I ever wanted, the job, the praise, the future. I opened my mouth to protest, but Michelle held up a hand. I know it wasn't true. I know Dad loved us both, but James knew exactly which buttons to push. He fed my insecurities. He made me believe that taking what was rightfully yours was actually taking back what should have been mine. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. By the time he introduced himself to you at that gala, I was already lost. Already his. Karen leaned forward. So the whole relationship between James and Rachel, the dating, the engagement, the marriage, it was all part of the plan? Yes. The word came out like a confession at a funeral. James was never in love with Rachel. He was never in love with me either, though it took me years to understand that. He's not capable of love. He's only capable of wanting things and taking them. I thought about our wedding day, James's vows, the tears in his eyes as he promised to love and cherish me until death do us part. All of it fake. All of it performance. A 6-year con job with my life as the prize. When did the plan change? I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. When did it go from wait for Dad to die to kill Dad ourselves? Michelle closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet with fresh tears. About 3 years ago, Dad started getting suspicious of James. Small things at first. Questions about business decisions. Comments about how James seemed too interested in company finances. Dad pulled me aside one day and said he didn't trust your husband. He said there was something wrong with James. Something he couldn't put his finger on. And he was thinking about hiring a private investigator. She took a shaky breath. I told James. And James decided we couldn't wait anymore. He said if Dad started digging, he would find out about us. About the affair, about everything. So we had to act fast. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. He gave me the arsenic. He told me exactly how much to put in Dad's food when I visited. He said it had to be slow, had to look natural. 6 months of tiny doses. 6 months of watching my own father get weaker and weaker while I smiled and pretended everything was fine. The image rose unbidden in my mind. My father, in those last months, complaining of fatigue, shortness of breath, heart palpitations. I had been so worried. I had begged him to see a cardiologist, and Michelle had been there through all of it, nodding sympathetically, helping schedule appointments, holding my hand at the funeral. "You watched me cry," I said, my voice shaking. "You watched me fall apart when he died. You held me and told me it would be okay." Michelle's face crumpled completely. "I know. I know what I did. I know what I am. And I've spent every single day since then wishing I could take it back, wishing I had been brave enough to say no, wishing I had been strong enough to tell you the truth before it was too late." She looked at me with eyes full of something that might have been hope and might have been despair. "But I'm telling you now, Rachel. I'm telling you everything. Because James is going to kill you the same way we killed Dad. And I would rather spend the rest of my life in prison than let that happen." The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming against Karen's windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside, the three of us sat in heavy silence. Karen had moved to the armchair across from the couch, her face pale but composed. I remained frozen on the edge of my seat, my mind struggling to process everything Michelle had just told me. My sister had poisoned our father. My sister had helped plan my murder. My sister had slept with my husband for years while smiling at me across holiday dinner tables. And yet, looking at her now, broken and hollow and drowning in guilt, I couldn't find it in myself to hate her. Not completely. Not when she was also a victim. Not when the real monster was still out there, probably staring at security footage and planning his next move. "Tell me about the plan," I said, my voice flat. "The one for me. I need to know exactly what James was going to do." Michelle flinched at my tone but nodded slowly. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders as if it could protect her from the weight of her own words. "After Dad died and you inherited everything, James wanted to move fast. But I convinced him to wait. I told him it would look suspicious if something happened to you so soon after losing your father." She laughed bitterly. "I thought I was buying time. I thought maybe if I delayed long enough, I would find a way out. Find the courage to stop it. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." Michelle's eyes dropped to her lap. "James waited about 6 months, and then he started talking about it again. The plan. He had it all mapped out. Rachel, every detail, every contingency. He's not just a killer. He's a planner, a strategist. He thinks 10 steps ahead." Karen shifted in her chair. "What was the plan, exactly?" Michelle took a deep breath. "The same thing we did to Dad, but slower, more careful. James said the key was patience. You give someone tiny doses of poison over a long period, and their body starts to fail in ways that look completely natural. Fatigue, memory problems, heart irregularities. By the time anyone thinks to look for foul play, there's nothing left to find." I thought about the past 6 months, the exhaustion that never seemed to go away no matter how much I slept, the heart palpitations that my doctor attributed to stress and caffeine, the vitamins, I whispered. "The herbal tea he makes me every night." Michelle nodded, her face twisting with anguish. "That's how he does it. Small doses hidden in things you consume every day. Things that come from someone you trust, someone you love." Karen stood up abruptly and disappeared into her kitchen. I heard cabinets opening, the sound of running water, and then she returned with a glass of water and 2 ibuprofen. "Here," she said, pressing them into my hand. "You look like you're about to pass out." I swallowed the pills mechanically, barely tasting the water. My mind was still spinning through implications and connections. "There's more," Michelle said quietly. "James didn't just want your money. He wanted to make sure no one would ever question what happened to you. So, he found a doctor. Someone willing to falsify medical records for the right price. Dr. Nathan Cross, I said, remembering the name from earlier. Yes. He's not even a real doctor. Not anymore. He lost his license years ago for overprescribing opioids. But James found him and made him an offer. Cross would become your physician. He would document your declining health. Create a paper trail showing a genetic heart condition that ran in your family. And when you finally died, he would sign the death certificate without anyone ever ordering an autopsy. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. James had thought of everything. The slow poisoning, the fake doctor, the fabricated medical history. By the time I died, there would be nothing but a tragic story of a young woman who inherited her father's weak heart. How long? I asked. How long has he been poisoning me? Michelle hesitated. I don't know for certain. I've been in that room for 2 years. But based on what James told me before he locked me away, he was planning to start about 6 months after my funeral. He wanted to give himself time to grieve publicly, to play the devoted brother-in-law who had lost his beloved sister-in-law to suicide. 6 months after Michelle's fake suicide would have been around 18 months ago. I did the math in my head and felt my blood turn to ice. 18 months of poison. 18 months of slowly dying without knowing it. How am I still alive? I asked, more to myself than to anyone else. Because he's careful, Michelle answered. He keeps the doses low. He doesn't want you to collapse suddenly or show dramatic symptoms. He wants a gradual decline that no one questions. He probably planned for another year, maybe 18 months, before the final phase. The final phase? Michelle's face went pale. When your health had deteriorated enough that no one would be surprised by a sudden heart attack, that's when he would increase the dose. One big spike after months of slow buildup. Your heart would give out. Dr. Cross would rule it natural causes. Karen made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a curse. This is psychopathic. This is actual, clinical psychopathy. Yes, Michelle said simply. It is. James is a psychopath. He feels nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no love. People are just tools to him. Things to be used and discarded. I stood up suddenly, unable to sit still any longer. I walked to Karen's window and stared out at the rain-soaked street below. Somewhere out there, my husband was looking for me. Somewhere out there, a man who had killed my father and planned to kill me was wondering where his wife had gone. What changed? I asked, without turning around. You said you were going to tell me the truth. That's why James locked you up. What made you decide to stop? There was a long pause. When Michelle finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the rain. Mom, she whispered. I turned to face her. The night before I was supposed to help James with the next phase of the plan, I had a dream about Mom. She was singing that lullaby, the one she used to sing to us when we were little. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me in the dream, and she said, "Protect your sister. That's what family does." When I woke up, I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I called James and told him I wanted out. I said I was going to tell you everything. She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. He came to my apartment that night. I thought he was going to hurt me, but he just smiled and handed me a glass of wine. Said we should talk about it calmly. Her voice broke. I woke up in that room. The mention of our mother's lullaby hit me like a physical blow. That song had been the soundtrack of our childhood, the melody that soothed every nightmare, healed every scraped knee, dried every tear. Mom used to sing it to us every night before bed, her soft voice filling the darkness with warmth and safety. After she died, I never heard that song again. Until today, until I heard Michelle singing it in that underground room. You were singing it, I said quietly. When I found you, that's how I knew it was you. Michelle nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I sing it to myself every night. It's the only thing that keeps me sane in that place. The only connection I have left to who I used to be. Before James. Before everything. I turned away from the window and faced my sister fully. The anger was still there, coiled tight in my chest like a venomous snake. But underneath it, something else was stirring, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. "Tell me about Dad," I said. "Tell me exactly what happened. I need to know." Michelle's face crumpled. This was the part she had been dreading, I realized. The affair, the plan, the imprisonment. Those were terrible things. But this was the worst of it. This was the thing she could never take back. "James gave me the arsenic in small vials," she began, her voice hollow. "Liquid form, odorless, tasteless. He told me exactly how much to use. 1 milliliter per day, hidden in Dad's morning coffee or his evening soup. He said it had to be consistent. Every single day, for 6 months. I thought about those 6 months. I had visited Dad every weekend, sometimes more. We had dinner together. We talked about the business, about life, about the future, and the whole time, my sister was slowly killing him. Did you ever think about stopping?" I asked. "Every day." Michelle's voice broke. "Every single day. I told myself this would be the last time. I would pour the vial into his coffee and promise myself I would never do it again. But then James would call, and he would remind me what was at stake. He said if I stopped now, Dad would recover, and all our planning would be for nothing. He said we were too far in to turn back." Karen had been silent for a long time, but now she spoke up. "You could have gone to the police. You could have told someone." "And said what?" Michelle's laugh was bitter, broken. "That I had been poisoning my own father for months? That my lover and I were planning to kill my sister for her inheritance? I would have gone to prison. James would have denied everything. He's smart, Karen. Smarter than anyone I've ever met. He never left any evidence, never sent any texts or emails about the plan. Everything was always in person, always verbal, always deniable. I thought about James, his careful, methodical nature, the way he always seemed to think 3 steps ahead. I had admired those qualities when we were dating. I had thought they made him a good businessman, a reliable partner. Now I understood they made him a perfect predator. The last month was the worst, Michelle continued, her eyes distant. Dad was so weak by then. He could barely walk from his bedroom to the kitchen. He kept saying he didn't understand what was wrong with him. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They ran test after test. But arsenic poisoning doesn't show up on standard blood work unless you're specifically looking for it. My father's face swam before my eyes, his smile growing weaker with each visit, his hands trembling as he held his coffee cup. His voice, once so strong and commanding, reduced to a whisper. I visited him the day before he died, I said, my voice cracking. He told me he was proud of me. He said he knew I would take care of the company. He said he wasn't worried about the future because I was strong enough to handle anything. Michelle made a sound like a wounded animal. I was there too. That same day, I came over after you left, and he said almost the same thing to me. He said he loved us both. He said we should always take care of each other. She pressed her hands against her eyes. And then I went home and mixed another dose of arsenic. The silence that followed was deafening. Rain continued to pound against the windows. Somewhere in the apartment, Mango meowed plaintively. He died the next morning. I said, yes. Michelle's voice was barely audible. James had calculated it perfectly. The final dose pushed his heart over the edge. When the paramedics came, they found a 62-year-old man with a history of cardiac symptoms who had suffered a massive heart attack. No one questioned it. No one suspected anything. I remembered that morning. The phone call from the hospital. The drive through traffic that seemed to take forever. Arriving too late. Holding my father's cold hand and begging him to wake up. And Michelle had been there beside me. Crying. Grieving. Playing the role of the devastated daughter while knowing exactly what she had done. How could you? The words came out in a whisper, carrying all the pain and betrayal I couldn't put into stronger language. How could you sit beside me at his funeral? How could you hold my hand and tell me everything would be okay? How could you look me in the eyes and lie? Michelle stood up from the couch, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She crossed the room and knelt before me, her thin hands reaching for mine. I flinched away, but she didn't stop. "Because I'm a coward," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Because I was weak and selfish and so afraid of losing James that I destroyed everything else. Because I loved a man who wasn't capable of loving anyone. And I let that love turn me into a monster." She grabbed my hands despite my resistance, her grip surprisingly strong. "But I'm not that person anymore, Rachel. 2 years in that room changed me. Every night, I dreamed about Dad, about Mom, about you. Every night, I begged God for a chance to make things right." Her voice rose with desperate intensity. "And now you're here. You found me. This is my chance. Please, let me help you stop him." I looked down at my sister, at her hollow cheeks and desperate eyes and trembling hands. The woman who had helped murder our father. The woman who had planned to murder me. The woman who had lied and betrayed and destroyed, but also the woman who had changed her mind. The woman who had tried to save me and been imprisoned for it. The woman who was willing to go to prison herself if it meant stopping James. Could I trust her? Could I afford not to? Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against Karen's hardwood floor. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass, watching raindrops race each other down the pane. "I need air," she whispered, but she did not move toward the door. Behind her, Michelle remained on the couch, her thin frame curled into itself like a wounded animal seeking protection. Karen stood between them, her legal mind already working through possibilities, her eyes moving from one sister to the other. "Rachel," Karen said carefully, "I know this is overwhelming, but we need to think strategically. James doesn't know you found Michelle. That's our only advantage right now." Rachel laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Advantage? My husband poisoned my father. My sister helped him. And now I'm being poisoned too. What kind of advantage is that?" She turned from the window, and for the first time since leaving the warehouse, she let herself truly look at Michelle. Her sister seemed so small now, so fragile. The Michelle she remembered had been vibrant, confident. The one who always knew what to say at family gatherings. The one who made their father laugh when no one else could. This Michelle was a ghost of that woman. "Do you have any idea what you took from me?" Rachel's voice cracked on the words. "Dad called me the night before he died. Did you know that? He said he wanted to talk about something important. He sounded worried." "Michelle." He sounded scared. Michelle's face crumpled. He was starting to figure it out. "James said we needed to move faster. So, you killed him faster." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Karen stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Rachel's arm, but Rachel shook it off. "I held his hand in that hospital room," Rachel continued, her voice rising. "I told him I loved him. And the whole time, the poison you put in his body was finishing what you started." "I know," Michelle sobbed. "I know, Rachel. I think about it every single day. Every single hour in that room, I thought about what I did to him, what I almost did to you." Rachel's hands were shaking now. 18 months. For 18 months, she had been swallowing poison with her morning vitamins, drinking it with her evening tea. She thought about all the times James had brought her breakfast in bed, smiling as he handed her the cup. She thought about how he would kiss her forehead and tell her to take her supplements. How could you? The question was barely audible. He was our father. He raised us alone after Mom died. He worked 2 jobs so we could go to college. He gave us everything. James made me believe it was the only way, Michelle said, her voice pleading. He said Dad was going to cut us both out of the will. He said Dad had found out about the affair and was going to tell you everything. James convinced me that if Dad talked, I would lose you forever anyway. He said this way, At least we would have the money, and I could still be in your life. Rachel stared at her sister, trying to reconcile the woman before her with the little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who used to braid her hair before school, who used to promise they would always protect each other. You chose money over family, Rachel said flatly. You chose a man who was using you over your own blood. I chose wrong. Michelle's voice was raw with desperation. I know that now. I've had 2 years in that room to understand exactly how wrong I was, and I'm begging you, Rachel, not for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that, but let me help you stop him. Let me help you survive what he's planning. Karen cleared her throat. She's right about one thing, Rachel. James doesn't know his plan has been exposed. If we move carefully, we might be able to gather enough evidence to put him away for life. Rachel closed her eyes. The lullaby echoed in her mind again, her mother's voice singing about mockingbirds and diamond rings. Her mother had always said that family was everything, that sisters were supposed to protect each other. But how do you protect yourself from the very person who was supposed to protect you? What exactly are you proposing? Rachel asked, her voice hollow. Karen and Michelle exchanged a glance. Then Karen reached for her laptop on the kitchen counter. I have a contact, Karen said slowly. Someone who might be able to help us. Karen's contact arrived at 11 that night. Detective Sarah Torres was not what Rachel had expected. She had imagined someone older, perhaps worn down by years of chasing criminals through Portland's rainy streets. Instead, the woman who stepped through Karen's door was in her early 40s, with sharp dark eyes and silver streaks running through her black hair like lightning bolts frozen in time. Karen Mitchell, Sarah said, embracing her friend briefly. When you called, I thought you were joking. Then I heard your voice. I wish I were joking, Karen replied, stepping aside to let the detective in. Sarah's gaze swept the apartment with professional precision, taking in Michelle's frail figure on the couch, the untouched cups of tea on the coffee table, and finally settling on Rachel. The detective studied her for a long moment, and Rachel felt as though she were being read like a case file. You're Rachel Chen, Sarah said. It was not a question. I've seen your work. The Chen Construction Building downtown. Beautiful design. Thank you, Rachel managed, though the compliment felt absurd given the circumstances. Sarah removed her jacket and sat in the armchair across from the couch. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, the kind with a leather cover worn soft from years of use. Karen gave me the basics over the phone, Sarah began, her voice calm and measured. But I need to hear everything from the beginning. Every detail you can remember. For the next hour, Rachel and Michelle recounted the story. The affair, the poisoning, the hidden room, the staged suicide. James's plan for Rachel. Sarah listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across the pages of her notebook. Occasionally, her eyes would narrow at a particular detail, or she would nod slightly, as if confirming something she had suspected. When they finished, Sarah closed her notebook and leaned back in the chair. James Whitmore, she said slowly, tasting the name like something bitter. I know that name. His logistics company has been on our radar for years. Nothing we could prove, but there have been rumors. Shipping containers that don't match their manifests. Connections to people who make other people disappear. Rachel felt her stomach drop. You think he's done this before? I think your husband is a very careful man who has been playing a very long game. Sarah's expression was unreadable. The question is whether we can catch him before he realizes the game has changed. Michelle leaned forward, her voice urgent. I can testify. I'll tell them everything. About the poisoning, about Dad, about the room. I'll go to prison if I have to, but James needs to be stopped. Sarah regarded Michelle with something that might have been respect. Your testimony will be crucial, but it won't be enough on its own. A good defense attorney would tear apart the word of an admitted accomplice. We need physical evidence, documents, recordings, something that proves James orchestrated all of this. The warehouse. Rachel said suddenly. The room where he kept Michelle. There must be evidence there. Sarah shook her head. If James is as smart as I think he is, that room is already being cleaned. The moment he realizes Michelle is gone, he'll destroy everything. Then what do we do? Karen asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her fingers tapping against her notebook. Then she looked directly at Rachel, and there was something fierce in her eyes. We set a trap, she said. James doesn't know you found Michelle. He doesn't know you know about the poisoning. As far as he's concerned, you're still his obedient wife, slowly dying according to his schedule. Rachel understood immediately. You want me to go back to him. I want you to make him believe nothing has changed. While you do that, I'll dig into his background, his finances, his connections. Michelle will work with a prosecutor I trust to document everything she knows. And when James feels safe enough to make his next move, we'll be ready. The plan was terrifying. The plan was dangerous. The plan might be the only chance Rachel had. How long? Sarah's answer chilled her to the bone. As long as it takes. Rachel pulled into the driveway of her West Hills home at midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth and cedar. Through the windows, she could see the warm glow of lamps still burning on the first floor. James was waiting for her. She sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. In her purse was a small recording device Sarah had given her, no bigger than a tube of lipstick. In her mind was the knowledge that the man inside that house had been slowly killing her for 18 months. She thought of Michelle's words. She thought of her father's final phone call. She thought of all the mornings James had kissed her cheek and handed her a cup of poisoned tea. Then she opened the car door and walked toward the house. James met her in the foyer. He was wearing the cashmere sweater she had bought him for his last birthday, and his face was arranged in an expression of concern so perfect it made her stomach turn. Rachel, where have you been? I've been worried sick. He reached for her, pulling her into an embrace. I came home early and you weren't here. You didn't answer my texts for hours. She forced herself to relax into his arms, to breathe in the familiar scent of his cologne. The cologne she had once loved. The cologne that now smelled like betrayal. I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady despite the screaming in her head. Karen had an emergency. Her mother fell and broke her hip. I rushed over to help and left my phone in the car. James pulled back, studying her face. For a terrifying moment, Rachel thought he could see through the lie. Then, his expression softened. You should have called me. I would have come with you. I know. I wasn't thinking clearly. She managed a weak smile. I'm exhausted. It's been a long night. Of course. James guided her toward the kitchen, his hand warm on the small of her back. Let me make you some tea. It'll help you sleep. The tea. The poison. Actually, Rachel said quickly, I think I just need to lie down. Would you mind if I went straight to bed? Something flickered in James's eyes. Disappointment? Suspicion? It vanished before Rachel could identify it. Whatever you need, darling. He kissed her forehead gently. I have some work to finish in my office anyway. I'll join you later. Rachel nodded and climbed the stairs, feeling his gaze on her back the entire way. When she reached the bedroom, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She waited 30 minutes, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Then, when she heard the faint murmur of James's voice on a phone call in his office, she slipped back into the hallway. James's home office was at the end of the corridor, separated from the master bedroom by a guest room and a bathroom. Rachel moved silently on bare feet, pausing at each doorway to listen. The thick carpet muffled her footsteps. The office door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see James at his desk, his back to her, speaking in low tones into his phone. No, the timeline hasn't changed, he was saying. Another 2 weeks, maybe 3. The dosage is calibrated perfectly. It'll look like her heart simply gave out. Rachel pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle the gasp that rose in her throat. She fumbled for her phone, opening the recording app with trembling fingers. She held it toward the gap in the door, praying the microphone would capture his words. The sister was a complication, but it's handled. No one will ever find that room. By the time anyone thinks to look, there won't be anything left to find. James laughed at something the other person said. The sound was warm, casual, as if he were discussing weekend plans rather than murder. Trust me, he said. I've done this before. Rachel's blood turned to ice. Rachel retreated to the bedroom before James finished his call. She lay beneath the covers with her eyes closed, forcing her breathing to remain slow and even, though every nerve in her body screamed for her to run. James came to bed an hour later. She felt the mattress dip under his weight, felt his lips brush against her temple in a gesture so tender it made her skin crawl. "Good night, darling," he whispered. She did not respond. She did not trust her voice. The next morning, James left for work at 7:30, kissing her cheek and reminding her to take her vitamins. Rachel smiled and nodded, watching through the kitchen window as his black Mercedes disappeared down the tree-lined street. The moment his car turned the corner, she spat the vitamins into the trash and reached for her phone. "I got something," she told Sarah. "A recording. He was talking to someone about the timeline for my death." "And Sarah?" "He said he's done this before." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Stay in the house. Search everywhere you can without leaving traces. I'm going to pull everything I can find on James Whitmore's history. Every marriage, every business partner, every woman who ever got close to him." Rachel spent the next 3 hours searching. She started with James's home office, careful to photograph everything before she moved it. The desk drawers yielded nothing but ordinary documents, contracts and invoices and tax returns. The filing cabinet was locked, but Rachel remembered seeing James retrieve a small key from behind a portrait of his grandfather in the hallway. The key fit perfectly. Inside the cabinet, behind rows of manila folders containing legitimate business records, Rachel found a leather briefcase she had never seen before. It was old, the leather cracked and worn, with brass clasps that clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. What she found inside stopped her heart. Photographs, dozens of them, women of different ages, different backgrounds, all sharing the same radiant smile of someone in love. Each photograph was labeled with a name and a date on the back, written in James's precise handwriting. Margaret Holloway, 1998. Susan Chen, 2003. Diana Mercer, 2008. Elizabeth Vance, 2013. Catherine Shaw, 2018. 5 women, 5 names, 5 dates, spanning 20 years. Beneath the photographs were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Rachel's hands trembled as she spread them across the desk. Local woman dies of heart failure at 32. Tragic death. Leaves. Husband. Devastated. Widow inherits fortune after wife's sudden passing. The pattern was unmistakable. Each woman had died young. Each death had been attributed to natural causes. And each time, the grieving husband had inherited everything. James Whitmore was not just planning to kill her. He had been doing this for over 2 decades. 5 wives, 5 murders, 5 fortunes stolen from women who had trusted him with their hearts. Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. She thought of Susan Chen, the second name on the list. Chen, the same surname as her own. She flipped through the clippings until she found Susan's obituary. Susan Chen, died 2003, survived by her husband, James Whitmore, and her younger brother, David Chen. The room tilted around Rachel. David Chen, her father's name. Susan Chen had been her father's sister, her aunt, a woman she had never known, who had died before Rachel was born. James had married into her family before. He had killed before. And somehow, impossibly, he had circled back to finish what he started. Rachel photographed everything with shaking hands. Then she carefully replaced the briefcase, locked the cabinet, and returned the key to its hiding place behind the portrait. She called Sarah with tears streaming down her face. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "So much worse." They gathered in a conference room at the FBI field office in downtown Portland. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of everyone seated around the metal table. Rachel sat between Karen and Michelle, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had not touched. Across from them, Sarah Torres stood beside a whiteboard, covered in photographs and connecting lines. Next to her was Agent Michael Park, a senior FBI investigator with 20 years of experience in financial crimes and serial murder cases. His expression was unreadable as he studied the evidence Rachel had provided. "James Whitmore," Sarah began, tapping a photograph of Rachel's husband, pinned to the center of the board. "Real name, we believe, is James David Morrison, born 1968 in Sacramento. His first known marriage was in 1998 to Margaret Holloway, a real estate developer worth approximately $12 million. She drew a line to another photograph. Margaret died of apparent heart failure in 2001. James inherited everything. 6 months later, he moved to Seattle and changed his name. Agent Park took over, his voice deep and measured. "The pattern repeats 5 times over 20 years. Each wife was wealthy. Each death was ruled natural causes. Each time, James reinvented himself with a new identity and moved to a new city." Rachel stared at the photographs of the women. 5 faces, 5 lives, ended by the same man who had held her in his arms and promised to love her forever. Susan Chen was his second wife. Sarah continued softly, her eyes meeting Rachel's. "Your father's sister. She died in 2003, leaving James with control of a significant portion of the Chen family business assets. We believe this is how James first learned about your family's wealth." Michelle spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "He planned this for years. He waited until Dad built the company into something worth taking, and then he came back." "The affair with Michelle wasn't random," Agent Park confirmed. "It was strategic. James needed someone inside the family, someone who could help him access David Chen without raising suspicion. Michelle was vulnerable, lonely, eager for attention. He exploited that." Michelle flinched at the words, but she did not deny them. "So what do we do?" Karen asked, her legal mind cutting through the emotion. "We have Rachel's recording, the photographs, the newspaper clippings. Is that enough?" Agent Park shook his head. "It's compelling, but circumstantial. A good defense attorney could argue the recording was taken out of context, that the photographs are merely mementos of past relationships. We need James to confess directly, or we need to catch him in the act of attempting to harm Rachel." The room fell silent. Rachel felt all eyes turned toward her. "You want me to be bait?" she said, flatly. Sarah moved around the table and knelt beside Rachel's chair. "I know what I'm asking, and I won't pretend it isn't dangerous. But James is planning to kill you within the next 2 to 3 weeks. If we don't act now, you may not survive long enough for us to build a traditional case. What exactly would I have to do?" Agent Park pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "We've prepared a scenario. You tell James you've been feeling unwell, that you're worried about your heart. You suggest seeing a new doctor, someone independent. James will panic. He'll either try to accelerate his timeline or make a mistake trying to stop you. And when he makes that mistake, we'll be watching. Every room in your house will be monitored. Every phone call recorded. The moment James makes a move against you, we'll have agents ready to intervene." Rachel looked at Michelle, at the sister who had betrayed her, who had helped murder their father, who was now willing to go to prison to make things right. Then she looked at Karen, her oldest friend, who had dropped everything to help her survive. Finally, she looked at the photographs on the whiteboard. 5 women who never got the chance to fight back. "When do we start?" Rachel asked. 3 days later. Rachel set the trap in motion. She waited until dinner. when James was relaxed and unsuspecting, his guard lowered by a glass of expensive wine and the comfort of routine. They sat across from each other at the dining table, the same table where they had shared hundreds of meals, where James had toasted to their future while slowly feeding her poison. Rachel pushed her food around the plate, eating little. It was not difficult to appear unwell. The knowledge of what her husband truly was had stolen her appetite weeks ago. "You're not eating," James observed, his brow furrowing with practiced concern. "Are you feeling all right?" Rachel set down her fork and pressed a hand to her chest. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I've been having these episodes lately. Shortness of breath, tightness in my chest. Sometimes my heart races for no reason at all." She watched James's face carefully. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Satisfaction? Anticipation? It vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. "That sounds concerning," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "A few weeks, maybe longer." Rachel allowed her voice to tremble slightly. "I didn't want to worry you, but it's getting worse. I think I should see a doctor." James's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, darling. I'll call Dr. Cross tomorrow. He's been taking care of you for years." Nathan Cross. The corrupt physician Michelle had mentioned. The one who would falsify Rachel's medical records to support the story of hereditary heart disease. "Actually," Rachel said carefully, "I was thinking of seeing someone new. Karen recommended a cardiologist at Oregon Health Sciences University, Dr. Sarah Williams. She's supposed to be one of the best in the region." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. James's smile remained fixed, but his eyes had gone cold. "I don't think that's necessary. Dr. Cross knows your medical history. A new doctor would just have to start from scratch. But that's exactly why I want a fresh perspective. What if Dr. Cross has missed something? What if there's a problem he hasn't caught?" Rachel pulled her hand away and stood, walking to the window. "I'm scared, James. What if something is really wrong with me?" She heard him rise from his chair, felt him approach behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, his thumbs pressing into the tense muscles of her neck. "Nothing is wrong with you that we can't handle together," he murmured against her hair. "Let me take care of this. Let me take care of you." The words might have been comforting once. Now, they sounded like a threat. "I already made an appointment," Rachel said quietly. "It's next Tuesday at 10. James's hands stilled on her shoulders. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he released her and stepped back. "If that's what you want," he said, his voice perfectly controlled. "I just want you to be healthy." He excused himself to his office, claiming he had work to finish. Rachel remained at the window, watching his reflection disappear down the hallway. The moment he was gone, she heard it. A melody, soft and distant, drifting from somewhere deep in the house. A lullaby. The same lullaby her mother used to sing. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Rachel's blood ran cold. It was coming from James's office. Was he playing it deliberately? Did he know about Michelle? About the warehouse? She forced herself to remain calm. Upstairs, hidden in the bedroom closet, FBI technicians had installed cameras and microphones that captured everything. Whatever James was planning, they would see it coming. But as the lullaby continued to play, Rachel could not shake the feeling that she was not the only one setting a trap. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, he knows. "Get out now." Asterisk. Rachel stared at the message on her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Asterisk. "He knows. Get out now." Asterisk. Asterisk. The number was unfamiliar. Not Sarah. Not Karen. Not anyone from the FBI team. Someone else was watching. Someone who knew what James was planning before even the surveillance team did. She forced herself to think clearly. The front door was 30 feet away. Her car keys were in her purse on the kitchen counter. If she moved quickly, quietly, She could be out of the house before James realized she was gone. Rachel slipped off her heels, carrying them in one hand as she padded silently across the hardwood floor. The lullaby had stopped. The house was unnaturally quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of every breath you take. She reached the kitchen and grabbed her purse. Her fingers found the car keys, cold metal against her palm. 20 feet to the front door. Just 20 feet. Going somewhere, darling? James stood in the doorway to the living room, blocking her path. He was still wearing the same charcoal sweater, the same perfectly pressed slacks, but everything else about him had changed. The warmth had drained from his face. His eyes, which had always seemed so kind, now held nothing but cold calculation. "I was just going to get some air," Rachel said, hating the way her voice shook. "I'm feeling dizzy. Are you?" James took a step toward her. "Or are you feeling guilty about something?" Rachel's grip tightened on her keys. "I don't know what you're talking about, don't you?" Another step. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, could see the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "I received an interesting phone call tonight from a friend who works at the FBI field office. Apparently, someone has been asking questions about me, about my history, about my previous marriages." The blood drained from Rachel's face. There was a leak. Someone inside the FBI had betrayed them. "James, did you really think I wouldn't find out?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Did you think you could outsmart me, Rachel? Women far cleverer than you have tried. They're all buried now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. Rachel recognized it immediately. Arsenic, the same poison that had killed her father, that had been slowly killing her for 18 months. "I had such plans for you," James continued, rolling the vial between his fingers. "A slow, dignified death. A grieving husband who would inherit everything your father built, but you had to ruin it by being curious." Rachel took a step backward, her hip bumping against the kitchen island. "The FBI knows everything, James. They have recordings. They have photographs. Even if you kill me, you won't escape." James laughed, and the sound was utterly devoid of humor. "The FBI knows what I want them to know. I have friends in places you cannot imagine, Rachel. Friends who owe me favors. Friends who will make sure certain evidence disappears and certain witnesses have accidents." He unscrewed the cap of the vial. "I was going to give you another 2 weeks, but I think we both know that's no longer an option." Rachel's hand found the knife block on the counter behind her. Her fingers wrapped around a wooden handle. "One scream," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And the agents listening through those microphones will be through the door in seconds." James smiled. "What agents?" "The surveillance equipment was disabled 20 minutes ago. My friend made sure of that. Right now, you and I are completely alone." He took another step forward. Rachel pulled the knife from the block. "Stay away from me." James looked at the blade, then back at her face. For a moment, something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "There she is," he murmured. "The fighter. I always knew you had it in you." He lunged. James moved faster than Rachel expected. His hand closed around her wrist, twisting until pain shot up her arm and the knife clattered to the floor. He shoved her backward, and she slammed into the refrigerator with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. "You really thought you could hurt me with that?" James picked up the knife, examining the blade with casual interest. 5 women have tried to fight back over the years, Rachel. 5 women who were stronger, smarter, more desperate than you. Do you know what they all have in common? Rachel pressed her hand against her bruised ribs, gasping for air. Exactly. James set the knife on the counter, just out of her reach. But I don't want to use something so crude on you. I've always believed in elegance, in patience, in making death look like nature's own design. He raised the vial of arsenic. Rachel's eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for anything she could use. The knife was too far. The door was behind James, but on the counter to her left, within arm's reach, sat the cast iron skillet she had used to make dinner. "Open your mouth," James said, stepping closer. "Make this easy on yourself. One swallow, and it will all be over in a few hours. I'll hold your hand while you slip away. I'll tell everyone how brave you were at the end. Like you held Susan's hand?" Rachel spat the words at him. "Like you held my aunt's hand while she died from the poison you fed her?" Something dangerous flashed across James's face. "You've been doing your research. I know everything, James. I know about Margaret Holloway, Diana Mercer, Elizabeth Vance, Catherine Shaw. I know you've been killing women for 20 years, and I know you married my aunt first, learned about my family's wealth, and then came back to finish what you started." James's composure cracked, just for a moment. "Your aunt was a mistake. She was supposed to be the last one. But then I saw the reports about Chen Construction, about how David had built it into an empire, and I thought, why settle for a piece when I could have it all? So you seduced my sister. You used her to kill my father. It was almost too easy." James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Michelle was so desperate for love, so hungry for attention. All I had to do was whisper the right words, and she was willing to do anything, even poison her own father. Rachel's fingers brushed against the handle of the skillet. "But you made a mistake," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You kept Michelle alive. You thought you could control her forever. But she found her conscience. She remembered who she really was. Michelle is a loose end that will be tied up soon enough." James grabbed Rachel's jaw, forcing her head back. "Now open your mouth, or I'll break your teeth and pour it down your throat." Rachel swung the skillet with every ounce of strength she possessed. The impact connected with James's temple, producing a sound like a hammer striking wet clay. He staggered sideways, the vial slipping from his fingers and shattering on the tile floor. Clear liquid splashed across his shoes. Rachel did not wait to see if he would recover. The front door was locked. Her trembling fingers fumbled with the deadbolt as she heard James roaring behind her, his footsteps pounding across the hardwood. She got the door open just as his hand grabbed her hair, yanking her backward. She screamed and twisted, leaving a chunk of hair in his fist as she tumbled down the front steps. Pain exploded in her ankle as she landed wrong on the concrete walkway. Headlights blinded her. A car screeched to a stop at the end of the driveway. "Rachel!" Karen's voice cut through the chaos. Rachel crawled toward the car, her injured ankle dragging behind her. James appeared in the doorway, blood streaming down the side of his face, his expression twisted with fury. "This isn't over," he snarled. Then sirens filled the night air, red and blue lights flickering between the trees. Someone had called for backup. The sirens grew louder, splitting the night like screams. Rachel lay on the cold concrete, her ankle throbbing, her scalp burning where James had torn out her hair. Through blurred vision, she watched as 3 police cruisers and 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of the house. Doors flew open. Agents in tactical gear poured onto the lawn, their weapons drawn, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "FBI, get on the ground." Now, James stood frozen in the doorway, blood still dripping from his temple. For a moment, Rachel thought he might run. Instead, he raised his hands slowly, that cold smile returning to his face. "You're making a mistake," he called out to the agents. "I have friends who will have all of you transferred to desk jobs in Alaska by morning." Agent Michael Park stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the flashing lights. "James David Morrison, you're under arrest for the murders of Margaret Holloway, Susan Chen, Diana Mercer, Elizabeth Vance, and Catherine Shaw. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." 2 agents forced James to his knees, cuffing his hands behind his back. He did not resist, but his eyes found Rachel across the lawn, and the hatred in them made her blood run cold. "This isn't over," he said quietly. You have no idea what you've started. Then they dragged him toward one of the SUVs, and he was gone. Karen reached Rachel first, dropping to her knees beside her on the concrete. Are you okay? Oh God, Rachel, your ankle. Don't move. The paramedics are coming. How did you know? Rachel gasped. The surveillance was disabled. How did anyone know to come? Before Karen could answer, another figure emerged from one of the FBI vehicles. Detective Sarah Torres walked toward them, her face grim but relieved. Behind her, supported by a female agent, was Michelle. Michelle called me, Sarah explained, kneeling beside Rachel. 20 minutes ago, she received an anonymous text warning her that James had discovered the operation. She immediately contacted me, and I rerouted backup from the Portland field office. Rachel looked at her sister, who stood trembling in the driveway, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. The text, Rachel whispered. It came from the same number that warned me. Sarah nodded. We're tracing it now. Whoever sent those messages knew about the leak in our office before we did. They knew James was going to move tonight. A guardian angel, Karen murmured, or someone with their own agenda. Sarah's expression was troubled. Either way, they saved your life tonight, Rachel. Both your lives. The paramedics arrived, lifting Rachel onto a stretcher and immobilizing her ankle. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Michelle broke away from the agent and ran to her side. Rachel, I'm so sorry. Michelle's voice cracked with desperation. I should have fought harder. I should have stopped him years ago. I should have. Rachel reached out and took her sister's hand. The gesture surprised them both. You warned me, Rachel said softly. When it mattered most, you chose to warn me. That's something. It was not forgiveness. Rachel did not know if she would ever be capable of that. But it was acknowledgement. It was a beginning. Michelle squeezed her hand, fresh tears spilling down her face. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Every detail. Every crime. Every person James ever worked with. I'll make sure he never hurts anyone again. Sarah stepped forward. We're going to need that testimony, Michelle. James mentioned having friends in powerful places. This investigation is just getting started. As the paramedics loaded Rachel into the ambulance, she looked back at her house one last time. The home she had shared with James for 3 years. The home where she had been slowly poisoned while believing she was loved. She would never set foot inside it again. Take me to the hospital, she told the paramedic. And then take me anywhere but here. 3 months later, Rachel sat in the front row of courtroom 7 at the Multnomah County Courthouse. The room was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, their notebooks open, their eyes hungry for every detail. Camera crews waited outside, ready to broadcast the verdict to a nation that had become obsessed with the case of the man they called the Widowmaker. James sat at the defense table, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was neatly combed, his posture relaxed, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than his own murder trial. He had not looked at Rachel once since the proceedings began. The prosecution had spent 2 weeks presenting evidence. Forensic reports detailing the arsenic found in the exhumed bodies of 5 women. Financial records tracing millions of dollars that had flowed from dead wives into James's offshore accounts. Testimony from Dr. Nathan Cross, who had taken a plea deal in exchange for confirming everything Michelle had revealed about the poisoning scheme. But today was different. Today, Michelle would take the stand. Rachel watched as her sister walked slowly toward the witness box, her thin frame draped in a simple black dress. Michelle had spent the past 3 months in protective custody, working with prosecutors to document every detail of James's crimes. She had also begun treatment for the physical and psychological damage caused by 2 years of captivity. She looked fragile, but there was something new in her eyes. Determination. Resolve. The ghost of the woman she had once been, fighting to return. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Diana Walsh, approached the witness stand. Please, state your name for the record. Michelle Elizabeth Chen. And what is your relationship to the defendant? Michelle's gaze flickered briefly to James, then away. I was his lover, his accomplice, and eventually, his prisoner. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Harrison called for order. Miss Chen, can you describe for the court how you first met James Whitmore? Michelle took a deep breath. He approached me at a charity event 8 years ago. I was 26, lonely, struggling to find my place in my family's company. He made me feel special, seen. He told me I deserved more than the life I was living. And when did your relationship become romantic? Within a month, he was patient, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. Michelle's voice grew quieter. I didn't know he was already married to my sister. I didn't know he had been planning to target my family for years. Diana Walsh picked up a folder from the prosecution table. Miss Chen, I'm going to show you Exhibit 47. Can you identify this document? Michelle studied the paper, her face pale. It's a timeline. James created it. It shows the schedule for poisoning my father, David Chen, over a period of 6 months. And who administered the poison? The courtroom held its breath. I did. Michelle's voice cracked, but she did not look away. James gave me the arsenic. He told me exactly how much to put in my father's food and drink. He said it would look like heart disease, that no one would ever suspect. Rachel felt tears burning her eyes. She had heard these words before, in Karen's apartment on that terrible night, but hearing them in open court, watching her sister confess to patricide in front of the world, was something else entirely. Why did you agree to participate in this plan? Diana Walsh asked. Michelle was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I loved him. Because I was weak. Because I believed his lies more than I believed in my own family. She finally looked at Rachel, her eyes swimming with tears. And because I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did. James shifted in his seat, his composure slipping for the first time. His attorney leaned over to whisper something, but James waved him away. Miss Chen, Diana Walsh continued, what happened when you tried to end your involvement in the conspiracy? Michelle's answer silenced the room. He locked me in a concrete room beneath his warehouse and left me there to die. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Crane who charged $800 an hour, rose to cross-examine Michelle. Miss Chen, he began, his voice dripping with practiced skepticism. You've admitted under oath to poisoning your own father. You've confessed to being part of a conspiracy to murder your sister. Why should this jury believe anything you say? Michelle did not flinch. Because I have nothing left to gain by lying. I've already lost everything. My freedom, my family's trust, my future. The only thing I have left is the truth. The truth? Crane smiled coldly. Or a convenient story designed to save yourself from a longer prison sentence? I signed a plea agreement that guarantees me 8 to 12 years in federal prison, Michelle replied evenly. I could have stayed silent and let James's lawyers tear apart the prosecution's case. Instead, I chose to testify because my sister deserves to know what happened. Because the families of those 5 women deserve answers. Because James Whitmore needs to be stopped. Crane opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Harrison interrupted. Move along, counselor. The cross-examination continued for another hour, but Crane could not shake Michelle's testimony. Every trap he set, she avoided. Every contradiction he tried to create, she clarified. By the time he sat down, the jury was looking at James with undisguised contempt. The defense called no witnesses. James himself refused to testify, sitting motionless at his table, while his attorney delivered a closing argument that even Rachel could see was desperate and unconvincing. 3 days later, the jury returned. Rachel sat rigid in her seat as the 12 men and women filed back into the courtroom. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and steady eyes, held a folded piece of paper in her hands. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Harrison asked. We have. Your Honor, on the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Margaret Holloway, how do you find? Guilty. The word echoed through the silent courtroom. Rachel felt Karen grip her hand. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Susan Chen? Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Diana Mercer? Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Elizabeth Vance? Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Catherine Shaw? Guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of Rachel Chen? Guilty. On the charge of kidnapping and false imprisonment of Michelle Chen? Guilty. 7 counts. 7 guilty verdicts. 20 years of murder and manipulation, finally exposed to the light. James sat perfectly still as the verdicts were read, his face a mask of stone. But when Judge Harrison announced that sentencing would take place in 2 weeks, something broke behind his eyes. He turned in his seat and looked directly at Rachel for the first time since the trial began. You think this is over? His voice was low, venomous. You think you've won? I have friends you've never even heard of. I have connections that reach further than you can imagine. This isn't justice. This is just the beginning. 2 bailiffs moved toward him. But James was not finished. Your father begged at the end, Rachel. Did Michelle tell you that? He begged for his life while the poison burned through his veins. And your Aunt Susan? She called out your father's name while she was dying. She thought he would save her. Remove the defendant. Judge Harrison ordered. As the bailiffs dragged James toward the side door, he laughed. The sound was hollow, empty. The laugh of a man who had finally run out of masks to wear. I'll see you again, Rachel, he called over his shoulder. In this life or the next. Then the door slammed shut, and he was gone. Rachel sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. Karen wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It's over, Karen whispered. He can't hurt you anymore. But as Rachel stared at the empty chair where James had sat, she was not so sure. 2 weeks later, Rachel stood before the court to deliver her victim impact statement. The courtroom was quieter this time. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by a somber anticipation that hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Family members of James's other victims filled the gallery. Women and men who had spent years believing their loved ones had died of natural causes, who now understood the terrible truth. James sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. The charcoal suits and expensive watches were gone. What remained was just a man, stripped of his masks and his money, waiting to learn his fate. Rachel approached the podium with a single sheet of paper in her trembling hands. She had written and rewritten this statement dozens of times, trying to find words that could capture the magnitude of what James had taken from her. In the end, she had settled on simplicity. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. 3 years ago, I married a man I believed was kind, generous, and loving. I built a life with him. I trusted him with my heart, my home, and my future. I did not know that every morning when he handed me my vitamins, he was feeding me poison. I did not know that every night when he kissed me goodnight, he was calculating how many more weeks until my heart would fail. She paused, looking directly at James. He did not meet her gaze. James Whitmore murdered 5 women before me. One of them was my aunt, Susan Chen, a woman I never had the chance to know because he killed her before I was old enough to remember her face. He then waited patiently, watching my family from a distance, until my father built Chen Construction into something worth stealing. And then, he came for us. Rachel's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. He seduced my sister. He used her loneliness and her insecurity to turn her into a weapon against our own father. He convinced her to poison the man who had raised us, who had sacrificed everything to give us a better life. And when Michelle tried to escape, when she found the courage to say no, he locked her in a concrete room and left her there to rot. Tears streamed down Rachel's face now, but she did not wipe them away. My father died believing his heart had betrayed him. He died confused and afraid, not understanding why his body was failing. He died calling out for my mother, for the wife he had lost years before. James Whitmore stole his dignity, his peace, and his life. He stole 18 months of my own life while I unknowingly ingested the same poison. He stole my ability to trust, to love, to feel safe in my own home. She looked at Judge Harrison, her eyes burning with conviction. There is no sentence that can undo what this man has done. There is no punishment that can bring back Margaret Holloway, Susan Chen, Diana Mercer, Elizabeth Vance, or Catherine Shaw. There is no justice that can give my father another sunrise, another cup of coffee. But I ask this court to ensure that James Whitmore never has the opportunity to destroy another family. I ask that he spend the rest of his life behind bars, with nothing but the memory of his victims to keep him company. Rachel folded her paper and stepped back from the podium. Judge Harrison nodded solemnly. Thank you, Miss Chen. The court appreciates your courage in sharing your statement. He turned to James. Does the defendant wish to make a statement before sentencing? James finally raised his head. His eyes swept across the courtroom, lingering on Rachel, on Michelle, on the faces of the families he had destroyed. Then he smiled. No, Your Honor. I have nothing to say to any of them. Judge Harrison's expression hardened. Very well. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and set them carefully on the bench. The gesture was slow, deliberate, as if he needed a moment to compose himself before speaking. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a cold fury that Rachel had never seen in a courtroom before. James David Morrison, he began, using the defendant's true name. In my 32 years on the bench, I have presided over hundreds of criminal cases. I have sentenced murderers, rapists, and men who committed unspeakable acts of violence. But I have never encountered a defendant quite like you. James sat motionless, his smile frozen in place. You are not a man who killed in passion or desperation. You are not a man who made a terrible mistake and must now face the consequences. You are something far more dangerous. You are a predator who spent 2 decades hunting women for profit, who manipulated and murdered without remorse, who treated human lives as nothing more than stepping stones to wealth. Judge Harrison's voice grew harder with each word. You married Margaret Holloway and poisoned her slowly, watching her health deteriorate while you planned how to spend her money. You married Susan Chen and did the same, leaving her brother David to mourn a sister he never knew was murdered. You repeated this pattern 3 more times, perfecting your technique, learning how to appear grieving while counting your inheritance. He picked up a document from his desk. The forensic evidence presented in this trial was overwhelming. The testimony of your accomplice, Michelle Chen, was corroborated by financial records, medical reports, and the discovery of arsenic in the exhumed remains of all 5 victims. You have shown no remorse, offered no explanation, and demonstrated no recognition of the suffering you have caused. James finally spoke, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. You will not speak, Judge Harrison interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. You had the opportunity to address this court, and you declined. You will now listen. The judge turned to face the gallery, where the families of the victims sat in rows of grief and anger. To the loved ones of Margaret Holloway, Susan Chen, Diana Mercer, Elizabeth Vance, and Catherine Shaw, I want you to know that this court has heard you. Your pain has been witnessed. Your loss has been acknowledged. And while no sentence can restore what was taken from you, I intend to ensure that this man never has the opportunity to harm another person for as long as he lives. He turned back to James. James David Morrison. For the first-degree murder of Margaret Holloway, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first-degree murder of Susan Chen, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first-degree murder of Diana Mercer, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first-degree murder of Elizabeth Vance, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the first-degree murder of Catherine Shaw, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 5 life sentences. 5 women, avenged. These sentences will run consecutively, Judge Harrison continued. Additionally, for the attempted murder of Rachel Chen, I sentence you to 25 years. For the kidnapping and false imprisonment of Michelle Chen, I sentence you to 15 years. All sentences to run consecutively. The math was staggering. Even if James lived to be 100, he would never see freedom again. You will be transferred to the Oregon State Penitentiary to begin serving your sentence immediately. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court certainly does not. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Rachel watched as the bailiffs lifted James from his chair. For the first time since she had known him, he looked truly afraid. The mask had finally cracked, revealing the hollow emptiness beneath. As they led him toward the door, he turned one last time to look at Rachel. But there was no threat in his eyes now. Only the desperate confusion of a man who had finally run out of lies. The door closed behind him. It was over. 1 week after the sentencing, Rachel received a letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from Seattle. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in elegant cursive that somehow seemed familiar. Asterisk. Dear Rachel. Asterisk. Asterisk. By now, you know what James was, what he did to your family, and to so many others before you. I am glad he is finally where he belongs. Asterisk. Asterisk. You deserve to know who warned you that night. You deserve to understand why someone was watching over you when the FBI's protection failed. Asterisk. Asterisk. My name is Elizabeth Vance. Or rather, it was supposed to be. James believed I was his 4th wife, a woman he poisoned and buried in 2013. But the woman in that grave was someone else entirely. Asterisk. Asterisk. I discovered James's true nature 3 months into our marriage. I found the photographs, the newspaper clippings, the careful records he kept of his previous wives. I knew that if I confronted him or tried to leave, I would end up like the others. Asterisk. Asterisk. So I made a different choice. Asterisk. Asterisk. I staged my own death. I paid a coroner to falsify records, bribed a funeral home to bury a Jane Doe in my place, and disappeared with enough evidence to destroy James whenever I chose to use it. I have spent the past 12 years watching him from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to expose him. Asterisk. Asterisk. When I learned he had married you, I began monitoring his movements more closely. I hacked into his security systems, intercepted his communications, and discovered his plan to murder you, just as he had murdered the others. I also discovered that he had corrupted an agent inside the FBI, a man named Peter Walsh who owed James money from gambling debts. Asterisk. Asterisk. The night James disabled the surveillance equipment in your home, I sent the warning to you and your sister. I also contacted Agent Michael Park directly and informed him of the leak. That is how backup arrived in time to save your life. Asterisk. End. Abren time. End. Asterisk. I am not a hero, Rachel. I am a coward who chose to save herself rather than fight. If I had come forward years ago, your father might still be alive. Your Aunt Susan might have received justice sooner. Michelle might never have fallen into James's trap. Asterisk. Asterisk. I carry that guilt with me every day. Asterisk. Asterisk. But I hope that my actions on that night count for something. I hope that by helping you survive, I have begun to atone for the years I spent hiding while other women died. Asterisk. Asterisk. I will not reveal myself publicly. The world believes Elizabeth Vance is dead, and I intend to keep it that way. But I wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to understand that even in his darkest moments, James never truly had complete control. There was always someone watching. Someone waiting. Asterisk. Asterisk. You are stronger than you know, Rachel. Stronger than James ever gave you credit for. Use that strength to build a life worth living. Asterisk. Asterisk. With respect and hope. Asterisk. Dodd. A. Rachel read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling with each pass. Elizabeth Vance. The woman whose photograph she had found in James's briefcase. The woman who had faked her own death to escape the same fate that awaited Rachel. She thought about calling Sarah Torres, about handing over the letter as evidence. But evidence of what? Elizabeth had committed no crime, except survival. She had spent 12 years in hiding, carrying the weight of her silence, watching James destroy other families because she was too afraid to stop him. And yet, in the end, she had made a choice. She had sent the warning. She had exposed the leak. She had saved Rachel's life. Rachel walked to the fireplace in Karen's living room, where she had been staying since the trial ended. She held the letter over the flames for a long moment, watching the paper curl at the edges. Then she pulled it back. Some secrets deserved to be kept. Some debts could never be fully repaid. But this letter was proof that even in the darkest stories, there were people who chose to help when it mattered most. Rachel folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She would keep Elizabeth's secret. It was the least she could do. Rachel visited her father's grave on a Sunday morning in late November. The cemetery was quiet. The autumn leaves scattered across the manicured lawns like fragments of forgotten prayers. A cold wind blew in from the west, carrying the smell of rain and the distant promise of winter. Rachel pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she walked between the rows of headstones, her boots crunching softly on the gravel path. David Chen's grave was modest, just as he would have wanted. A simple granite marker with his name, his dates, and a line from his favorite poem, "Do not go gentle into that good night." Rachel knelt before the stone and placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums in the small vase beside it. For a long moment, she simply stared at the engraved letters, trying to find words that felt adequate. "I found out the truth, Dad," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what happened to you. I know who did it. And I made sure he'll never hurt anyone else." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and Rachel imagined it was her father listening. "I'm angry. I'm so angry that you were taken from me. That your last months were filled with pain and confusion. That you died thinking your own heart had betrayed you." She wiped at the tears that had begun to fall. "But I'm also grateful. Grateful that you raised me to be strong enough to survive this. Grateful that you taught me to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." She touched the cold granite, tracing the letters of his name with her fingertips. "Michelle is going to prison. 8 years, maybe more. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive her for what she did to you, but I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to remember that she was a victim too, in her own way, that James manipulated her just like he manipulated everyone else." A car door slammed somewhere behind her. Rachel turned to see a familiar figure walking across the cemetery, moving slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome. Michelle. She was thinner than ever, her face pale and drawn from months of protective custody and the stress of the trial. She wore a simple black dress and carried a single red rose in her trembling hands. Rachel stood as her sister approached. Neither of them spoke. Michelle stopped a few feet away, her eyes fixed on their father's headstone. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I didn't know if you'd want me here," Michelle said quietly. "I almost didn't come. I wasn't sure either," Rachel admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything between them, pressing down like a physical force. Then Michelle stepped forward and knelt before the grave, placing the red rose beside Rachel's chrysanthemums. "I'm sorry, Dad," Michelle whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I know those words mean nothing. I know I can never undo what I did. But I need you to know that I loved you, that I've always loved you, and that not a single day will pass for the rest of my life when I don't think about what I took from you." Rachel watched her sister sob before their father's grave, and something shifted inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Perhaps not ever completely. but something that felt like the first crack in a wall she had built around her heart. She knelt beside Michelle and, after a long moment of hesitation, placed her hand on her sister's shoulder. Michelle looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Rachel said honestly. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were. But you're still my sister, and I think Dad would want us to try." Michelle's hand came up to cover Rachel's, squeezing tightly. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for giving me the chance." They stayed there together, two sisters kneeling before their father's grave as the first drops of rain began to fall. 6 months passed like water through open fingers. Rachel sold the house in West Hills. She could not bear to sleep in the rooms where James had plotted her death, could not drink coffee in the kitchen where he had poisoned her tea, could not look at the garden without remembering the man who had smiled at her across the breakfast table while counting down the days until her heart would fail. She bought a small craftsman bungalow in the Alberta Arts District instead. A cozy 2-bedroom with hardwood floors and a backyard garden that caught the morning light. It was modest compared to the mansion she had shared with James, but it was hers. Truly hers. No ghosts lingered in its corners. No memories poisoned its walls. The doctors said her body was recovering well. 18 months of arsenic exposure had left its marks. Subtle damage to her liver and kidneys that would require monitoring for years to come. But she was alive. She was healing. And every morning when she woke up without the fatigue and confusion that had plagued her during her marriage, she felt grateful for the simple miracle of her own survival. She had returned to work at Chen Construction 3 months after the trial, stepping into the role her father had always hoped she would fill. The company had suffered during the scandal, clients fleeing from the association with the serial killer's name. But Rachel had fought to rebuild, meeting with investors, reassuring partners, proving that the Chen family legacy was stronger than one man's evil. Karen visited every Sunday for brunch, bringing fresh pastries from the bakery down the street and updates on the latest legal proceedings. Agent Peter Walsh, the FBI leak, had been arrested and sentenced to 12 years for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Dr. Nathan Cross was serving 20 years for his role in falsifying medical records. The web of corruption James had built was slowly being dismantled, thread by thread. Michelle had begun serving her sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. Rachel wrote to her once a month, short letters that said little but meant everything. Michelle always wrote back, pages filled with apologies and memories of their childhood, stories about their father that Rachel had forgotten, promises to become the sister she should have been all along. It was not forgiveness. Rachel did not know if she would ever fully reach that destination, but it was communication. It was connection. It was two broken people trying to find their way back to each other across a chasm of betrayal. On a warm afternoon in May, Rachel sat in her new living room with Karen, a pot of chamomile tea between them and a folder of documents spread across the coffee table. "The paperwork is almost complete," Karen said, flipping through the pages. "Once we file with the state, the David Chen Foundation will be officially registered as a non-profit organization." Rachel looked at the logo she had designed herself. Her father's initials intertwined with an image of a house, representing the construction empire he had built from nothing. The mission statement focuses on supporting victims of domestic abuse and financial exploitation, Karen continued. "We'll provide legal assistance, emergency housing, and counseling services. We've already received pledges from 3 major donors who want to support the cause." Rachel picked up the document, reading the words she had written weeks ago. Asterisk. "The David Chen Foundation exists to honor the memory of a man who believed in building things that last. Our mission is to help survivors of abuse rebuild their lives, one brick at a time. Asterisk. Dad would have liked this," Rachel said softly. "He always said that the best buildings were the ones that gave people shelter when they needed it most." Karen reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "He would be proud of you, Rachel, for surviving, for fighting back, for turning something terrible into something that will help others." Rachel smiled, the expression still unfamiliar on her face after so many months of grief and fear. "I'm trying," she said. "Every day. I'm trying." Rachel found the music box while unpacking the last of her father's belongings. It was hidden at the bottom of a cardboard box labeled "Mom's Things" in her father's handwriting, buried beneath faded photographs and yellowed letters. The box was small, no larger than her palm, made of dark mahogany with delicate mother-of-pearl inlays forming the shape of a crescent moon. She recognized it instantly. Her mother had kept it on her nightstand throughout Rachel's childhood. Every night before bed, she would wind the tiny brass key and let the melody play while she sang along. Her voice soft and warm as candlelight. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Rachel had not heard that song without feeling fear since the night in the warehouse. The melody had become tangled with memories of Michelle's broken voice echoing through the darkness, of James's cruelty, of all the terrible truths that had unraveled in the months that followed. But sitting here in her new home, surrounded by the quiet peace she had built for herself, Rachel found the courage to win the key. The music began to play, tinny and delicate, each note hanging in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Rachel closed her eyes and let the melody wash over her. She remembered her mother's face, soft in the lamplight, smiling down at her as she tucked Rachel into bed. She remembered the feeling of safety, of being loved unconditionally, of knowing that no matter what happened in the world outside, this room and this woman would always be her sanctuary. She remembered Michelle as a little girl, crawling into Rachel's bed during thunderstorms, whispering that she was scared. Rachel would hold her sister close and sing the lullaby their mother had taught them. The same words, the same melody, until Michelle's trembling stopped and her breathing grew slow and even. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The tears came then, quiet and cleansing, streaming down Rachel's cheeks as the music box played on. She cried for her mother, taken too soon by illness. She cried for her father, stolen by betrayal. She cried for Michelle, lost in the darkness for so long. And she cried for herself, for the woman she had been before James, for the innocence she would never fully reclaim. But somewhere in the midst of her grief, something shifted. The lullaby was not James's weapon anymore. It was not Michelle's cry for help from a concrete prison. It was her mother's gift, passed down through generations, a thread of love connecting Rachel to everyone she had lost, and everyone she still had the chance to save. When the music box wound down, Rachel opened her eyes. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of her living room, casting golden light across the hardwood floors. Outside, birds sang in the garden she had planted last month, their voices bright and hopeful. She thought about Michelle, sitting in her cell in California, probably staring at the same afternoon sky through barred windows. She thought about her next letter, the one she had been struggling to write for days. Rachel picked up her pen and began to write. "Dear Michelle, I found Mom's music box today. Do you remember it? The one with the moon made of mother of pearl? I wound it up and listened to the song she used to sing to us. Asterisk. For so long, that melody has been a reminder of pain, of the night I found you, of everything James did to our family. But today, for the first time, I heard it differently. Asterisk. I heard Mom. I heard love. I heard the two little girls we used to be, holding each other through thunderstorms, promising we would always protect each other. Asterisk. I know we can't go back to who we were, but maybe we can find a way forward. Maybe we can learn to sing again. Asterisk. I'm not ready to forgive you completely. I don't know if I ever will be, but I'm ready to try. Asterisk. Your sister. Asterisk. Rachel. She sealed the letter and set it aside for mailing tomorrow. Then she wound the music box again and let it play. 1 year later, Rachel stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Portland Art Museum. 300 faces looked back at her. A sea of supporters, donors, and survivors who had gathered for the official launch of the David Chen Foundation. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting prismatic light across tables decorated with white roses and flickering candles. A banner behind her displayed the foundation's logo and its mission statement in elegant gold lettering. Karen sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Detective Sarah Torres had come, wearing civilian clothes for once, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Agent Michael Park stood near the back, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but somehow approving. And in the second row, escorted by 2 federal marshals in plain clothes, sat Michelle. The prison had granted her a 12-hour furlough to attend the event, a rare exception that Rachel had spent months fighting to obtain. Michelle looked healthier than she had in years, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. The hollow desperation replaced by something that looked almost like peace. Rachel cleared her throat and began to speak. 1 year ago, I lost everything I thought I knew about my life. I discovered that my husband was a monster who had murdered 5 women before me. I learned that my own sister had been manipulated into helping him kill our father. I found out that for 18 months, I had been slowly poisoned while believing I was loved. The room was utterly silent. For a long time, I didn't know how to move forward. The betrayal was too deep, the grief too overwhelming. I spent months wondering if I would ever feel safe again, if I would ever be able to trust another person, if I would ever find a reason to keep going. She paused, her eyes finding Michelle in the crowd. But I learned something important during the darkest moments of that journey. I learned that healing is not a destination. It's a choice we make every single day. It's the decision to get out of bed when everything hurts. It's the courage to ask for help when we feel most alone. It's the willingness to believe that even broken things can be made whole again. Rachel looked down at her notes, then pushed them aside. My father, David Chen, built his company from nothing. He came to this country with empty pockets and a head full of dreams, and he spent 40 years turning those dreams into reality. He believed that everyone deserved a roof over their head, a place to feel safe, a foundation to build their future upon. She gestured to the banner behind her. The David Chen Foundation exists to continue that legacy. We provide legal assistance to victims of domestic abuse. We offer emergency housing to those fleeing dangerous situations. We fund counseling services for survivors of trauma. And we do this because my father taught me that the measure of a person's life is not what they accumulate, but what they give away. Rachel took a deep breath. I cannot change what happened to my family. I cannot bring back my father, or my Aunt Susan, or the other women James Whitmore destroyed, but I can honor their memory by helping others escape the darkness they could not. I can take the worst thing that ever happened to me and transform it into something that might prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. She looked at Michelle again, and this time, her sister was crying. To everyone here tonight, thank you for believing in this mission. Thank you for believing in second chances. And thank you for believing that even after the deepest betrayal, love can find a way to grow again. The applause began slowly, then built into a wave that washed over Rachel like warm rain. She stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding, her eyes wet with tears she did not try to hide. Karen reached her first, pulling her into a tight embrace. Then Sarah, then others whose names Rachel barely knew, but whose support meant everything. And finally, Michelle. The marshals allowed them a moment together, standing face to face in the middle of the crowded ballroom. Neither of them spoke. Words seemed inadequate after everything they had been through. Instead, Rachel simply reached out and took her sister's hand. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was not a promise that everything would be okay. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough.